The urgent issues of immigration and the budget. Will Republican outrage over the former complicate making a deal with Democrats on the latter? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. We are 9 days away from authorized funding for the federal government drying up. Without that authorization, the federal government essentially runs out of money. The main goal for this Congress in its final session is to take care of that. But hard feelings over the president's executive action on immigration could greatly complicate matters. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill with what Republicans can and cannot do about it. But we begin with White House correspondent Wendell Goler and some Republican venting today. Good evening, Wendell. Good evening, Brett. Fresh from their Thanksgiving recess, House Republicans mounted a broad attack on the president's executive actions on immigration.
The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order.
Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson faced angry members of the House committee that oversees his department who said the president can't bypass Congress to shield illegal immigrants from deportation.
The president created that category, not Congress. That is a clear violation of the constitutional principles.
With 11 or 12 million people in the country illegally, Johnson said he doesn't have the resources to deport them all, so it makes sense to prioritize. He said President Reagan and the first President Bush did similar moves, though not on the scale of President Obama, whose executive action would cover 4.5 million people. And Johnson rejected the idea that the action would encourage more illegal immigrants.
The people we're talking about are already here. They've been here for years. They've become integrated members of society.
In the Judiciary Committee, Republicans called witnesses to challenge the legal basis for Mr. Obama's actions.
In our view, President Obama's actions are unconstitutional. President Obama's actions are unlawful. President Obama's actions violate the separation of powers.
His critics noted Mr. Obama himself said he'd changed the law in response to a protester. And while Press Secretary Josh Earnest suggested the president wasn't speaking literally, he conceded.
I think the impact of the law certainly has been changed in terms of the way that it affects millions of people who are in this country.
Some legal experts say provisions that enable the non-deported to qualify for senior citizens benefits go beyond prioritizing deportation.
These people will now get Social Security cards. We don't know how Social Security cards have anything to do with prosecutorial discretion.
But administration officials say the law allows anyone who pays Social Security taxes for 10 years to draw benefits. As for the White House argument that Congress can undo the immigration actions by passing an immigration bill,
I think Congress can pass a bill when the American people start regaining trust in the administration to actually do their job and enforce the laws that are already on the books.
Jay Sekulow says he thinks the past 4 presidents have all exceeded their authority on immigration. Not that he supports it. He says constitutional violations don't get better over time. Brett?
Wendell Goler live on the North Lawn. Wendell, thank you. Republican leaders are admitting there is only so much they can do about the president's immigration moves. One thing they say they won't do is shut down the government. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel on what options are available.
Focus on solutions.
After meeting with the House GOP conference, Speaker John Boehner spoke about plans to fund the government beyond December 11th and the impact of President Obama's action on immigration.
This is a serious breach of our Constitution. It's a serious threat to our system of government. And frankly, we have limited options and limited abilities to deal with it directly.
The House is expected to vote next week on a $1 trillion plus package to fund most of the government through the end of September, but the Department of Homeland Security only until March. And later this week on a largely symbolic bill from Florida Republican Ted Yoho that would say the executive branch doesn't have the authority to defer deportations. Some conservatives are preparing for battle.
This is the best ground to fight on because 218 votes holding together, and the president, his choice then is he can shut the government down if he does that, and we'll say, here's all the money. We put all the money on the table, all the money that you had last year, but now you want to violate the Constitution.
Other leading conservatives say the House should only do a short-term continuing resolution for the entire government until a new Congress takes over.
The cavalry is coming. We're going to have a historic majority in the House in 4 weeks. I would much rather deal with these some of these issues when we have those kind of majorities in the House and Senate in January.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid didn't rule out accepting what the House sends him.
I think it's kind of unfortunate they're talking about not doing Homeland Security, but that's the way it is, and we'll have to wait and see.
That is certainly a different tone from Reid. Meanwhile, the next Senate Majority Leader says President Obama hasn't gotten the message from the midterm elections.
By any objective standard, the president got crushed in this election. So I've been perplexed by the reaction since the election, a sort of in-your-face, dramatic move to the left.
Reid's Democratic colleagues would prefer a bill that funds the entire federal government through the end of the fiscal year, but they sound prepared to follow his lead. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill tonight. Mike, thanks. The Treasury Department Inspector General is refusing to comply with a judge's order to turn over 2,500 pages of documents for a lawsuit against the IRS over unauthorized White House access to taxpayer information. The reason? The documents contain taxpayer information and are therefore being withheld. This circular argument was touted by Treasury and White House officials today. A couple of prominent Republicans considered possible presidential candidates say they will run for re-election to the Senate. But what they will do after that seems vastly different. However, it's what a former governor is doing that seems to be top of mind for Republicans tonight. Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron has the latest on the presidential sweepstakes.
Having said for months he'd decide on a White House race by the end of the year, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush put his ongoing indecision on full display at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council meeting last night.
Can I do it where the sacrifice for my family is tolerable? But there's a level under which I would never subjugate my family, because that's my organizing principle.
Odd fears for someone whose father and brother were both presidents and whose son just got elected to statewide office in Texas. Bush makes no secret that if he runs, it'll be as a pragmatist and not as a combative conservative ideologue.
It has to be much more uplifting, much more positive, much more willing to, to be practical now in Washington world.
Conservatives think Bush is too moderate and compare him to Mitt Romney and John McCain, the last two losing Republican nominees. Bush clearly wrestles with whether he can wind up in the Oval Office if conservatives reject him in early voting states.
Lose the primary to win the general without violating your principles. It's not an easy task.
Ohio Senator Rob Portman's passing on a presidential run, saying he'll seek another Senate term and didn't think he could be an effective senator while campaigning for the White House. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul sees no such conflict. He'll seek Senate re-election and pursue the presidency, despite a state law in Kentucky prohibiting a candidate from appearing more than once on the ballot. Paul's team says they have several ways around the hurdle. The libertarian-leaning senator and Tea Party favorite continues to distance himself from GOP security hawks, insisting the U.S. must reduce its role as a global policeman.
I'm not talking about all or none, but I do believe less. I believe we've been everywhere all the time. We're about to bankrupt our country, and that there is great danger to what we've been doing. So I want less.
While the GOP field evolves, Hillary Clinton continues to lead the polls and avoid taking positions on controversial issues like the Keystone XL pipeline. She made no mention of it last night during a gala by the League of Conservation Voters, which adamantly opposes the pipeline.
Thank you.
The same day, Clinton also ignored Keystone at a fundraiser for pipeline supporter Mary Landrieu, the Louisiana Democratic senator in danger of losing her seat in Saturday's runoff. She made Keystone support critical and central to her candidacy. And Mrs. Clinton's discovering that when you run for president and don't take a stand on something controversial, it tends to make you stand out, Brad.
That's right. We'll follow it along the way. Carl, thanks. More on that race in Louisiana up a little bit later. Up next, the Taliban ramping up attacks on foreigners. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 43 in Knoxville, Tennessee, where police say 2 children and 1 adult were killed and 23 injured when a pair of school buses collided. One bus was flipped onto its side. The accident occurred just before 3 p.m. local time. The children on the buses were reportedly from an intermediate school and a primary school. Q13 Fox in Seattle with the arrest of a burglar who barricaded himself inside a store he was trying to rob. Police in Burien say the suspect rammed a minivan into the sporting goods store to gain entry, but officers arrived on the scene before the burglar could leave, and it took 5 hours to get him out of there. And this is a live look at Santa Monica Pier from Fox 11. A bit foggy out there. The big story there, rain. A Pacific storm is bringing much-needed precipitation to California, but it's raising fears of mud flows and flooding because of the barren hillsides and hard ground. Authorities have ordered evacuation of about a dozen homes due to mud flows 50 miles northwest of Los Angeles. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.